Welcome back to Fantastic Fantasy Fabrications. I'm Mike, and as you've just seen, we've been working on making the ultimate modular tower, walls, castles, city forts, stone buildings, etc. set for the dungeon rails. And we'll be adding to that collection today with these fantastic wooden doors. If you'd like to follow along with this project at home, you can find links to the project overview in the description. The secret to these wooden doors is in balsa wood. We're going to be putting our doors together just like a carpenter puts his doors together in real life, but ours aren't going to work. I'm not into opening and closing doors in my games. Shit's tedious in real life, you feel me? If you've been following along with my other videos, you know I'm a big fan of using the Cricut. And in this project especially, it's gonna save you a lot of time if you've got one. And of course, if you're a member of the Fantastic Factory, you'll be able to find these plans, as well as every other plan I make on Design Space, over on Patreon. But if you're not a member yet, head on down to the project overview. There you're gonna find the sizes and ready to print template to help you out with this project. So we're gonna use balsa wood for our door panels, but in addition to that, for all the metal banding and wood paneling, I'm gonna be using this 100-point cardstock. So the Cricut's gonna make short work of cutting out all of our parts. And in the meantime, we're gonna take these balsa wood rods that are about a ½ inch in size by a ¼ inch in height, and we're going to be cutting these to be the exact width of our doors. Now that we're done prepping all the wood, let's move on to prepping all the foam. And what we need to do is we need to mill out some 1 inch by 1/8 inch strips, some 1 inch by 1/4 inch strips, some 1/2 inch by 1½ inch block, and some 1/2 inch by 3/4 inch blocks. With all the prep work out of the way, we can move on to assembly. And assembly for these doors is pretty straightforward. We're going to take those square wooden dowels that we cut up, and using an uncut square dowel, we're going to place it on top of it to use it as a spacer. I'm going to use super glue because it dries really quick. After attaching both sides, go ahead and take that 1/2 inch foam block and insert it in the center, and using my Patron, I'm just going to line it over the edges and make it flush. Now I'm going to double up on the wood panel, but I'm going to cut off the bottom section of the original one first. This is going to give a little bit more breathing room for the magnetic rails. After all that's complete, you should end up with something that looks like this. And from there, you're about to watch me make my first mistake this build, as I'm going to add the archway doors to the stone doorway, but really I should wait, and you're gonna watch me rip it off in the next step so that I can do the wood paneling first. Luckily, this ended up not being a problem on any of the square doors. With the wood paneling completed and the stone doorways set, there's one more thing I want to talk about before we move forward, and that's with the double doors. I didn't do them in the same style as the single doors. Using these cutoffs from the Cricut is where I got the metal banding that I'm going to put in between the double doors here. And I used the same cutoffs as metal bandings on the singleton doors as well. Moving forward, I cut out the foam around the rail slots, and then I'm going to start to add the lock and handle. I provided a lot of shapes for the lock, so you have some real choice here. But for the handle, I'm going to use these metal rings that are sold for jewelry. And using this cotton swab, I'll position it the best I can. Next, we're going to add stone thresholds with these small strips of foam and some Aleene's tacky glue. After that, I'll super glue down pure nickel strips to the inside of the channels here on the balsa wood, so he has some real grab at the rails. Moving on from there, I decided to detail the stone door frame. So I brought out my pen and gave it a simple pattern that I could easily freehand. Now when it comes to putting the finishing details on the double doors, there's 2 ways I chose to do it. On one of them, I chose to use these diamond painting pieces, and I'm going to use those to symbolize the larger bolts, and use Mod Podge to use the smaller bolts. But if you don't have any of those diamond painting kits hanging around the house, just go ahead and use Mod Podge here. It's gonna look just fine. And in fact, as you see here, that's exactly what I did on my second door. I'll go back and add Mod Podge to the metal banding on the singleton doors as well. The last detail in the construction of our doors is the door stop on the back of the double door. And for that, I'm just gonna use balsa wood. The important part is to know that you're running with the grain, otherwise it's gonna look terrible if you take it from this end. And before we start painting, I'm gonna go over all the pen work with the hot knife. This is really gonna add a lot to the look of the door. And while I get to texturing all the stone, let me just say thanks to all my amazing patrons. And let me also say that if you've been enjoying this content so far, consider hitting like, subscribe, leave a comment. With texturing completed and the doors fully constructed, it's time to coat all your foam with Mod Podge and white paint. Next, I'm gonna use my airbrush to spray the door with chocolate bar. If you're curious about any of the painting techniques I use, Check out my last video on interior floors. In that video I cover exactly what techniques I use and how I use it. Dry brush the wood with this coffee latte and then lightly with this antique white. Then I'm gonna mask off all the wood with silly putty, which is a tip I picked up from the Mini Witch. If you don't know her channel, I'll link it down below. After masking off the door, we're gonna go ahead and spray all the stonework with warm gray from a Master's Touch. After spraying all the stonework, we come to my second mistake, and that's when I removed the mask of the silly putty. You see, it pulled up some of the metal banding that's on the doors. Honestly, all I did to correct this issue was take some tacky glue and put it back down. So after this quick fix, I moved on to painting all the stonework by hand. The exact color scheme that I used can of course be found in the project overview. And while I'm doing the hand painting, I'll bust out that gunmetal right now and I'll take care of that metal banding. Crossing our fingers and masking up one last time, we're gonna spray it all with a gray ink. And thankfully, this time, no damage. So we're good to apply the washes. And like I mentioned earlier, if you want to know exactly what goes into my oil washes, check out my last video on interior floors where I break it down in detail. Okay, so these sweet little puppies are finally ready for their clear coat. And for that, I really like to use this Vallejo acrylic matte varnish clear coat. But if you guys know of a cheaper alternative, you should post it down below. That's everything for this video, friends. Hit like, subscribe, leave a comment, and until next time, keep all your fantasy fantastic.